All right. So, welcome to the next episode of the Combat Subs podcast. I am here with my guest. He is Dan or Daniel. He doesn't care either way, Strauss. And he is a black belt under Roger Gracie. He teaches out of Mill Hill BJJ in London. He's competed in some of the biggest tournaments in the world. So ADCC, Polaris, Eddie Bravo International, also known as EBI. The part of the reason I wanted to have him on is he has a very unique take on strength and conditioning. That's one of them. And then the other is he has a really great nickname. So his nickname is the Raspberry Ape. And I'm sure later we'll get into how the hell that came about and those kinds of things. But the first question I want to ask you is, I saw a video of you not too long ago holding an anvil. And I don't know how many kilos it was, but it looked big. And while you were doing that, you were doing a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
Not the hold the anvil part, because I know that just means, right, you're crazy strong. But what's the key to actually doing a Rubik's Cube, even if you're not holding something heavy?
Okay, so it's a good question, actually. The Rubik's Cube was something that I learned to do. I kind of forced myself to be able to do it. And I did it because I thought it's one of those things that everyone thinks is kind of a cool little party trick to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
Everyone would like to have the ability to, pick up a Rubik's Cube off the side and just fiddle around with it and boom, all done in a couple of minutes. So I wanted to do that. So one day I bought a Rubik's Cube and obviously when you buy it, it comes already set, already done, completed. Yeah. And I know that you can kind of do a trick with it where you video yourself scrambling it up and then play it backwards and it looks like you're doing it. So anyway, I do this. I take this video. It looks really good. Looks really slick. You can't tell that I'm not actually doing it, that I'm just undoing it. And I post it onto social media and everyone starts going, oh, this is amazing. This is incredible. And at the time I was starting to do some other cool, strength stuff. And I thought, hold on a minute. I've like backed myself into a corner here, because if people realize that this is fake, then they're going to think all the other stuff I do is fake. It's going to throw and this is the first time I've ever publicly actually said that the first video I ever posted many, many years ago of me just doing it by itself was actually fake. But then immediately after doing that, I was like, damn, now I really need to learn how to do it, because if someone tests me now, I'm going to be exposed. So I remember I was really ill one day and I was just in bed all day and decided I'm not doing anything, can't do anything. I'm going to learn how to do this. And I got some videos up and just started learning. And I managed to, through kind of dogged perseverance, learn how to do it in just one day. So be able to go from nothing to being able to do it repeatedly in one day. And what I found was interesting about it is that it's just a bunch of patterns. And I definitely feel like my knowledge, my training in Jiu Jitsu allowed me to be able to remember the patterns better and kind of help that, whatever it is, sort of that pattern recognition that you get through Jiu Jitsu, maybe help me to learn it a little bit faster than some. In my experience of teaching other people, it takes them a little bit longer. I managed to do it in maybe like 8 hours or something. And what I did, so there's like you've got like the first step to get the first layer. You break it down into the 3 layers, first, second, and then all 3 together. Yeah. The first layer is kind of just, you kind of know the concepts, but there's no pattern, there's no algorithm. And you just work that one out. That one's easy to do, but can be a bit slow. And then once you get past there, they're all algorithms. So you need to remember them. It will be like, and they'll be written down. You can like write it as code, like front side left turn, front side clockwise 2 turns, right side upwards 2 turns, and doing all of these different movements to get everything into place. And I drilled it like I would drill a jiu-jitsu technique, because what you have a lot of the time, if you have a long jiu-jitsu technique, which doing a Rubik's Cube can definitely be described as a long technique, because you have many algorithms as part of it. You don't want to, so let's say doing the whole Rubik's Cube would be slapping hands, shooting a takedown, ending up in half guard, passing the side control, taking the mount, taking the back, and getting a rear naked choke. That's the whole thing all together. So you break it down to, okay, well, let's first drill how to do the takedown. Now let's drill the guard pass. Now let's drill the mount take. And that's the way that I did it. Once I'd learned the basic movement, I just did just the one algorithm. Instead of trying to do the whole thing, I just did the one until my hands could do it autonomously. Okay. So I didn't have to think about it. So a lot of the time now, if you ask me what to do, I couldn't tell you. I'd have to kind of close my eyes and imagine it or have a cube in front of me. So it's still the fact that my body kind of knows how to do it more than my head does. And that unless I have one in front of me, I can't really do it. But then, yeah, that's how I practice it. And that's how I learned to do it. I thought it was like a cool little experimentation into learning. And I've been able to kind of teach it using that style of just drilling the individual parts of it really repetitively, because is how I believe that you should train jiu-jitsu as well.
No, that's actually fantastic for two reasons. One, because obviously, right, you're kind of getting into the muscle recognition and just drilling it over and over again until you can't mess it up, essentially.
Yeah.
And the second reason is, about a week ago, my daughter brought home a Rubik's Cube, and she's 5.
Okay.
And she was like, "Hey, Daddy, can you do this?" I was like, "Shit." Right? Because like you want to be the good dad and be like, yeah, of course I can do this. And then I started Googling it and I'm like, this is frustrating. So essentially I have to spend a day just drilling over and over again all of the different turns.
Yeah, well, if you don't have as much time as I did, you can do it over a couple of days. But I definitely say when you're learning the algorithms, just learn it and just drill it many, many times until you cannot get it wrong. Then move on to the next one. And then once you've got all of those, you can stick them all together. And if you drilled it enough, it will be easy. And once you learn how to do it, probably for the first maybe couple of weeks or a month, I just made sure that I did it every day. And then I do it every couple of weeks. And now I can not do it for a few months and still pick it up and be all right. Like I can do it within a couple of minutes.
Nice. Okay. So any new tricks planned doing the Rubik's Cube, like hanging upside down from a balloon, holding an Atlas stone while doing it one-handed, something like that?
Yeah, doing that stuff. I do the Rubik's Cube with the anvil. I've done that a few times. I've done I do tearing cards sometimes, holding anvils and sandbags and stuff like that. The Rubik's Cube, yeah, I've seen someone do a Rubik's Cube in like bottom position of a squat with like the bar over their shoulders. That I can just about do. So yeah, I haven't really thought too much about it, but I should probably do it a bit more.
All right.
If you've got any ideas, let me know.
I'm sure I'll come up with a few as we keep talking.
Okay.
So let's get off of the Rubik's Cube piece and let's jump into jiu-jitsu a little bit. So if my math is right, you've been doing jiu-jitsu for 13-ish years, right? Somewhere in that neighborhood?
A little bit longer than that, probably about 15 years now.
Okay. How'd you get into it initially?
Yeah, so I kind of, when I was a kid, I used to, because I started jiu-jitsu about 15 years old. So when I was a little bit younger than that, I was kind of really interested in martial arts, but didn't really know much about it. So kind of dotted around different martial arts academies, never really enjoying it that much. Then I went to a Japanese jiu-jitsu academy. Liked it a little bit more, but still not super into it. But I stayed there for longer than any of the other ones. And after maybe about, I'm not sure exactly, but I'd say about maybe 6 months, maybe a little bit less. One of the instructors left, and the other instructor, who was Nick Brooks, who is my instructor, black belt under Roger Gracie now, he took over. And at that time, he'd already started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He'd already kind of stepped away from the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu side, and he was just using the gym to roll, basically. He took over, and then we kind of did a little bit hybrid, some Japanese jiu-jitsu, some grappling, some stick fighting, like all different stuff. And then one day I remember, because then I started training with him separately. We go train go to other gyms, and we pop down to Rogers and stuff. I remember one day him just saying, "We're going to go full Brazilian jiu-jitsu," and that's where Mill Hill BJJ started.
Nice. Okay. And you mentioned, right, your main coach is under Roger Gracie. Have you ever rolled with Roger?
Yeah, I've rolled with Roger a few times. Yes, I have. I've had I'd like to say the pleasure of rolling with Roger a few times, but it would be through gritted teeth that I'd have to call it a pleasure.
The key question is, did you get caught with an axe choke from Mount?
Probably. Probably, yeah. Probably. Almost certainly cross-choke me at some point.
I would imagine it's not fun, as you said, right? But like, is it like incredible pressure? Is it that he moves so fluidly? Is it everything? Like, what's...
Yeah, it's, Roger, I think, is sort of a special storm of like that Gracie jiu-jitsu royalty, like spiritual power. Like, he's just blessed by the jiu-jitsu gods, and that's combined with his physicality, his size, his natural size. He's huge. I think a lot of people, they see Roger, maybe they'll see him at weigh-ins when he's fighting MMA, or they'll see him with his top off or something. And he looks kind of like a bit of a long, lanky dude. But the thing is he's a big guy. He's just in like proportion. He's not jacked. He's not super muscular, but he's a very big, like his wrists are big, his hands are big, his ankles are big. You know how you can tell someone they're not a big guy because they've lifted a lot of weights. They're just naturally a very big guy.
Yeah.
And that really sums up Roger. You know, he doesn't look sort of that sort of physique where you think, oh, it's a normal looking guy, and then he continues to walk towards you, and by the time he gets you, you're looking up. He's 6'5". You know, he's wide as a barn door, and he's got all of the strength to back it up. And yeah, you know, rolling with him is it's and then you kind of compare. You know, everyone knows that he's got that nasty top pressure, but it's not the same. You can't just for people who train jiu-jitsu a lot, with people who know the game properly, they'll understand that top pressure is a very vague it's a very vague term, and there's lots of different types of really good top pressure. You know, so for example, Roger is like if you made a huge blanket out of lead, right? So it was like flexible, you know, it wasn't hard, it wasn't like a steel rod. It's kind of flexible, but it's very heavy. And you drop down on top of you. So wherever you go, everything's heavy all the time, and it kind of just suffocates you underneath it. That's Roger. Compared to, say, Braulio, who I've also had the displeasure of rolling with. Braulio is more like placing a giant anvil on top of you. Braulio's pressure, his like specific pressure, his localized pressure is, in my experience, worse than Roger's. People don't realize this about Bradley. So like this renowned top game player, his top pressure, he's a renowned guard player, but his top pressure is unbelievable. His side control is the worst side control I've ever been under, but in a different way. He's got this localized pressure. Roger has this generalized pressure where you just feel like you're drowning everywhere you go. Either way, not nice.
Yeah. I have a coach that's like that. And the way I describe rolling with him is if you basically back a jump truck onto my chest, yeah, that's what it feels like when he's on top of me. So yes, I know that localized pressure. Yeah. I don't know if I have a comparison for the blanket, but in my head, I can picture it, and it doesn't sound like fun.
Yeah. Well, Roger's kind of the best to ever do it in that regard. So
sure.
Yeah. At least I know what the worst of the worst feels like. Let's put it that way.
So, you know, you mentioned you've been doing it for a while. You kind of started doing Japanese jiu-jitsu and transitioned into the Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You know, if you were going to say, hey, here's like one or two things, the most important things I've taken away from my journey, what would those be?
Yeah, it's a hard question. It's like asking anyone. You know, jiu-jitsu is my life. You know, I've done it for longer than I haven't done it now. And I really, you know, I've done it my entire adult life, definitely. And I don't know who I am without it. So it's hard to say, you know, it's like asking someone, what have you learned from life is basically the question.
Everything.
I guess the framing of the question, really, the idea behind it is sort of what would my advice be to someone who's starting out, I guess.
There we go.
You know, really, and this is less from my personal perspective, but more from the perspective of me seeing other people make these mistakes, which is, it's all about consistency. You know, it's all about the long game. It's as simple as that. That's the most important piece of advice for jiu-jitsu, you know, and I think it's the most important piece of advice for life in general. It's about consistency. It's about playing the long game. Nothing worth having comes quickly, and anything that does come quickly can go very quickly as well. Whereas jiu-jitsu, you're in it for the long haul. It's never easy. You can't, you know, it's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a journey that you don't ever stop. It's a race that you never stop running for the whole of your life. So, you know, pack your sleeping bag, because it's going to be a long one, basically. Don't think that you're going to, you know, it's going to be a magic pill that you're going to take, and in a year's time, you're going to complete it, basically, because it never happens.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, earlier we talked a little bit about your unique style of training. And, you know, if I had to describe it, you know, other than, you know, some of the fun stuff like with the Rubik's Cube and tearing cards, right? I would describe your training style as more of a strongman style training style. Is that fair as far as off the mats?
Yeah, I think the word strongman actually has it has a number of different, again, you may notice that I get more detailed in my classifications and things.
Sure,
So
it's
when
hard
you
to
say,
pin you down to one specific thing, right?
yeah, when you say strongman, there's lots of different categories of that. So you have like what we would call the modern day strongman, which is your world's strongest man. You're like Hathor Bjornsons, your Brian Shaws, your Eddie Halls, you know, your very famous, larger than life, 200 kilo guys. And that is a form of training that I certainly have done. And even, you know, if it wasn't for the issues that I had in the past with my lower back, there was a time where if it wasn't for that, I would have considered maybe competing just for fun in a strongman competition of that style. That is not really, even though there's definitely elements of that training in my training, that's not really the ethos or philosophy that I have followed for a long time. It's more, but it is still strongman, but it's the older era of strongman. So the time before what we would call modern strongman today, when you're looking at sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, where strongman was a profession, they were entertainers. They were circus performers and entertainers, and they'd do, you know, when there was no TV, that you couldn't watch TV, instead you go to a theater and watch a guy lifting heavy weights and doing particular tricks with his body. And what you actually found is that a lot of these old-time strongmen, so like your George Hackensmiths, your Eugene Sandows, and guys like this, a lot of them were also wrestlers. So grappling and wrestling kind of went hand in hand with that style of training and that strongman and performing strongman style of training and philosophy. So that kind of reached out to me, especially as someone who's coming from a grappling background. That's it. And you know, I was never going to be a strongman because I'm not 6'8",
Yeah.
and 150 kilos before I started training, which these guys are. So these guys from back in the day, these old time strongmen, a lot smaller, a lot slighter, but very, very incredibly athletic still. Also incredibly strong and great wrestlers. So for me, that was what I based a lot of my training on early days. It moved towards, because I was a member, you know, I kind of trained at a gym where we had a lot of people competing in modern day style strongman. So I did for a while go into the Atlas Stones, the yoke, big farmers walks, you know, big log presses, stuff like that. Stuff that I all do a little bit now, but not so much. And now I'm starting to move back towards the old time strongman stuff. I'm working on more unconventional exercises by today's standards, but 100 years ago would have been considered the epitome of weightlifting.
Yeah, and you know, and when you think of, you know, most guys that I've talked to that, you know, compete at your level, right? They have a couple of different camps. Some of them do more Olympic style lifting. Some of them do a lot of, let's call it, you know, functional or kind of grappling specific kind of training, like a Turkish get up with a kettlebell, as an example,
Yeah.
right? That kind of stuff. And others do CrossFit.
Yeah.
And I can see the benefits of all of those. What are some of the benefits of doing your kind of training when you get on the mats?
Yeah, so you know, for example, Turkish get up is definitely an exercise that I do like to use at the moment. You know, another variation of that I'm kind of, one of the exercises that I'm really working on at the moment is like a bent press, which is kind of like, it's kind of got, it's almost like a standing Turkish get up, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So
kind of like bent over with your arm extended and you're
getting... yeah. So basically you start in like a position like you're going to overhead press something.
Okay.
But instead of moving the weight away from you, you move yourself underneath the weight. You have to go look it up afterwards, but it's a really great exercise that I'm starting to you know, really try and get into, and I do feel like I'm feeling the benefits of that as well. So in terms of the benefits, and also I'll add on to, as well as the old time style of strongman training that I do, I also like to do some more, let's say, modern but not super modern world's strongest man sort of stuff, like stone lifting and sandbag stuff. So that's something that I've been doing a lot over the last couple of years and seen a huge benefit on the mat. I think with the different styles of strength and conditioning that you can do stuff, it often depends on your style of grappling as well. This is like a really unique thing that you don't get in a lot of other sports. A sport like, you know, a sport like boxing, for example, you have to be powerful. It's a dynamic sport, even like MMA. If you're striking, you have to be powerful. You have to hit fast and hard. And to do that, you need to be training in that sort of style. Whereas you have something like grappling, you can have someone who grapples in a really dynamic, plyometric, explosive way. And then you can have someone that grapples in a much slower, controlled, grinding way. So you kind of have to match, you know, there's going to be some similarities, and there's going to be like a baseline of something that all athletes who do jiu-jitsu are going to need, but there's also going to be stuff that's going to be more suited towards one athlete than it is going to be to the other. So you kind of have to tailor your training towards that. You know, for me, I do some power exercises, even though not really Olympic lifts. I always found Olympic lifts, they're fantastic. I found it very, very technical lift to learn, and I didn't want to put so much technical work into my strength and conditioning stuff. I wanted to do some stuff, not saying that the stuff that I do doesn't need some technique, but Olympic lifting is a sport in itself, you know. It really is. You know, for me, the sort of training that I do, one, sort of make you a bit more resilient, injury resistant, but really when I grab onto an opponent, I want them to know that I'm grabbing onto them. So the sandbag stuff, the grip training stuff, the old time strongman stuff, being able to generate force and express strength into an opponent is sort of the biggest benefit that I've found from that.
Yeah, and also it's more of, think of it like a compound exercise, right? Where I'm not just working my shoulders or my triceps or whatever. It's right, your posterior chain, you're getting a little bit of shoulders or triceps or whatever into it as well. So, and that's when you grab onto a guy, it's not just one thing. That's part of the reason why, like, when you start, everybody always complains about being so sore. It's because you're using everything at once in all kinds of different ways, and your body.
A lot of people have never done that before.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the sandbags are a great example for that, which is you won't find any exercise as similar to fighting someone as you will to wrestling with a sandbag. It's still a big difference. You know, just like what Bruce Lee said, the boards don't punch back and the sandbags don't fight back. But if they could, they would. They've definitely got that spirit inside them, I'll tell you that. And that can be a real, if you're doing stuff like shouldering sandbags, Jesus Christ, or even picking up and squatting with some, it can be a nightmare sometimes.
For sure. So, you know, something else I know that you're kind of known for, that you work on a lot, is your grip strength, right? I've seen you doing the pull-ups. They're not necessarily Atlas stones, but they're big ass balls like this, where you're doing pull-ups and those kind of things. How did you develop, or, you know, kind of, I guess, how did you develop some of that grip strength?
Yeah. So, you know, grip strength was something that I was kind of made aware. I think Jiu-Jitsu is a sport, grappling is a sport where we don't have to be told that grip is important, you know? We know that more than anything else, you know? There are a lot of things that are important for you to train in grappling. It's important for you to train your core. It's important for you to train your shoulders. It's important for you to train your, you know, your legs. It's important to do neck, all of these things. That all of those come very, very low down on the list of obvious things that you need to work compared to your grip, because that is exposed every single roll you do. Every single time you make contact with someone, when they're able to break that, you go, man, if they couldn't break that, it would be a lot better for me. So it's so obvious early on. So training your grip is just something that is maybe training your grip isn't intuitive, but knowing that wanting to have a stronger grip or understanding the importance of a strong grip is something that is intuitive after your very first class of jiu-jitsu. So that was kind of the case for me as well. And as I started to get into strength conditioning a couple of years into me training, the grip was such an obvious thing that I wanted to overcome, because when I first started training, when I first started lifting, I was really small, very weak, you know, very weak grip. You know, I don't, and that's one of the reasons why I had to train so hard and have to train so consistently every single week for my, you know, for forever, is because I'm not blessed with any impressive natural strength ability. Everything that I have to work for. You see some guys who come in, you know, and they're just naturally incredibly strong. I just don't have that. So I have to work at it every single day to keep myself on sort of an even playing field with them, and try and get an advantage over them. But grip training is so important, you know, when it comes to grappling. If you can't, you know, your hands and and everything that they're connected to is your way of connecting yourself to your opponent. And if you can't do that in an effective way, then you're unable to express any of the power through the rest of your body. So really your ability to connect yourself to someone else in grappling is the most important thing that you could do. So training your grip is very important. And you know, in the many years that I've been training grip, I just got interested in it. And in the kind of, because the forearms, that, you know, when I talk about grip, a lot of people just look at your fingers, for example. You know, this is like a bad, if you train just gi, and I say the word grip, the first thing that will pop into your head is your fingers. And if you've trained gi for a long time, it will be your mangled, messed up fingers. That will be the first thing you think of.
Yeah.
Now, if I say grip and you just train no gi or wrestling, you're going to think of more of your hands.
Yeah.
But the reality is your grip is everything from the tip of your fingers to just past your elbow, really. Everything here is grip. That is what we're trying to build up, because it's a very complex mechanism. You know, if imagine what humans do with their hands, their ability to, you know, pick up a very delicate thing and not crush it, and then also be able to crush something if they want to crush it, or ability to express very precise variability in our power that we're able to generate, as well as what we can do dexterity wise, whether it's doing crazy sleight of hand magic tricks or playing the piano like a grandmaster. All of these different things, the hands are very complex. You know, they have many different articulations of the wrist, of the thumb, of the fingers, of the elbow. All of these things move in many different ways, and for that reason, in order to get a strong grip, you need to train all of these things. You can't just get a strong grip by, and this is what I try to explain to people who train just in the gi, you're not going to get a strong grip by just training in the gi. What you will get strong at is grabbing onto a gi, right? But then your wrist may be weak. So, and then the imbalance, because you're always gripping and your flexors are always working because you're always grabbing onto lapels, but your extensors aren't working because you're not doing anything else. That means that you have imbalances in your forearm now. So now your elbow is going to start hurting all the time. And you just go, oh man, I've been training Jiu Jitsu for 10 years. That's why my elbows hurt. No, your elbows hurt because you've been grabbing in the same way for 10 years. And that has caused an imbalance in the musculature of your arm. And now your elbows are hurting, which can be fixed or prevented by you actually doing a more varied type of grip training. So grip training is a very varied spectrum of different exercises. And for that reason, there's loads of different pieces of equipment that you can use. You definitely don't need as much as I have. I just like having all of the cool stuff. You know, I started out with very little, and you can make do with very little, but I just like having a cool collection of grip toys. But all of these different things work the grip in slightly different ways. So I kind of went down that path and saw the benefits of it and the different types of grip training that you can do with that. And yeah, never really looked back.
And part of the reason I bring it up is because you have an instructional literally just on grip training, and those watching on video, you could see like how excited he got, and he was leaning into the video when he was talking about all of the stuff. So yes, he's the master at this. He knows tons about it. But, you know, let's say it's just the random guy who doesn't have a home gym in his garage yet. Oh, right. And he's like, hey, I just need 2 or 3 things to work on the grip, either gi or no gi. What would you say?
Yeah. So, you know, a few things there. Firstly, thanks for the plug for the grip instructional. You can get that from my website. But speaking about the grip instructional, you know, the reason why I created that instructional is for the past 10 years, I've been known for my grip training. And every single week for the past 10 years, someone has messaged me, or many people have messaged me, asking me very, like almost the identical question. How do I get started? What's the best way to train my grip? What's the best grip exercise? What's your top 3 grip equipment? All of these things. So I thought, instead of me kind of having to answer as best I can, maybe I redirect them to my YouTube page. I have a few videos up there, or try and go, you know, do this, and that. Instead, I decided to make an entire instructional specifically to answer that question and do the best that I could at trying to pass on all of the knowledge that I've picked up over many years of grip training, and try and condense it into one instructional, and then have people be able to watch that and download that information into their brain, so they don't have to take 10 years of grip training to learn everything. But, you know, kind of what I was saying earlier is the main premise of the instructional, which is grip is much broader than what the majority, almost everyone, thinks, unless they really understand. It's very broad, and you need to train these grip things as accordingly. You know, you need to train these different categories, just like, you know, saying grip training as one category is like saying body training as one category. No, you've got to train your, you know, even though you can do compound exercises that can train everything, you still got to make sure you're training your legs, you train your shoulders, you train your pulling back muscles, you're pushing front muscles, chest muscles, stuff like that. It's the same for the grip. You've got to train all the different ranges of motion, be it, you know, crush or support or vertical or, you know, your fingers and your wrist, your, you know, all of these different ranges of motion. So that's kind of the premise of it. And we look how to go through. Now, you're asking the second question that everyone asks, you know, the question that they ask after I kind of say that first thing, which is, you have, you know, an entire wall of a gym dedicated to grip equipment. I don't have any of that stuff. What can I do? And that's kind of really where the timing of the grip instructional that I released, it was made for that specific time, which was in the UK, you know, really most of the world, but definitely in the UK, gyms have been shut on and off for the past year. I think probably gyms have been open for maybe 4 months over over summer, probably less than that actually in the UK. So everyone's really struggling to work out, and they're trying to work out from home. They don't have any equipment, let alone grip equipment. One of the big points of that instructional was to show people how easy it is to work your grip, and indeed to a certain degree work other things, but definitely work your grip with very minimal equipment. And when I say minimal equipment, that can mean no equipment. It can mean stuff that you have lying around the house. It could be a sledgehammer, or, you know, I say sledgehammer is the obvious one. You go, well, not everyone has a sledgehammer lying around the house. You could use a broomstick, you know, literally a broom. You could, I even show in the instructional where you can get a broomstick handle and duct tape a water bottle to one end, and you actually have a pretty versatile bit of equipment there. You know, you can use the stick for many different things. So yeah, going through and showing how with all of these different things, yes, you can use a specialized bit of equipment. You can also use something that is a gym equipment, but not specialized for grip, and convert it to something that you can train your grip with. And then you can actually have things that have nothing to do with training whatsoever and still use them in a way that's effective at training your grip. You know, anything with weight on, any stick with weight on one side can be used to work all of the ranges of motion of your forearm, supination, pronation, and ulnar and radial deviation, which is a massive thing that everyone should train. And you can literally do that with anything that has a weight on one side. That can be an axe, it can be a sledgehammer, it can be a broom, it can be a stick with a, you know, it could be a tree branch that, you know, where you're just, one side is slightly heavier than the other. Anything can work. So you know, people get intimidated by not having any you know, equipment to use to train. It's not an issue. You can always get around that stuff.
Yeah, and for those of us that have trained with people with strong grips, as you know, it's a nightmare. Like, there's a guy I trained with, Chemo. He was a gymnast when he was younger. Yeah. And he has this really weird thing where his thumb is the same size as his big toe.
Wow. That is terrifying.
It like in the gi, it's bad, right? Because once he holds on, like, you're never breaking that. It doesn't matter. You can stick both feet in it, try to break it. It's not happening. But in no gi, it's actually worse.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're not like, once he just holds on, you're not moving. Your wrist is stuck to the mat once he grabs onto you. And yeah, so it's definitely a very important part of getting into your training for sure.
Yeah, so, and you know what, just quickly, you mentioned no gi. That's another misconception that people have, a misconception that when you're training no gi, because you can't grab onto material, the grip is less important. I'd actually argue that the grip is more important no gi, because it's harder to make a connection with your opponent. So the sort of grip categories that you're going to be working specifically for the gi are actually a smaller range of categories than what you're going to have to work for no gi, because you're going to have to use the hands in so many different ways.
Yeah, like a simple one to think about, right? Is if you're making a pass and you kind of weave your hand in between their legs, just grabbing onto the thigh like this, right? That's kind of hard to hold with a man that's all sweaty and slippery. But if you can get the right grip strength, it makes it much easier to get around the legs.
Yeah, 100%.
So, you know, you mentioned training in the UK, and I haven't talked to anybody in the UK yet. I've talked to lots of Americans. I'm here in Arizona, talked to a guy in Australia. What has training been like in the past year in the UK?
Yeah, so basically, if you are following the law, you have not done any Brazilian Jiu Jitsu since the 20th of March of 2020. Zero, absolutely none. No one is able to do Jiu Jitsu legally since the beginning of the pandemic. And it is, we've been given a date, which is, if everything goes to plan, will be when we're first able to do indoor full contact again, which is the 21st of June. So you'll be coming up on a year and a quarter, a little bit more, of zero legal jiu-jitsu in the UK. So, you know, in terms of what people actually are doing, you know, there's kind of a bit of a loophole with the elites. People are allowed to continue training. Elite sportsmen are allowed to continue training, which some people got back on the mat because of. Most people are training most of the time. You know, we've had a few stricter lockdowns. We're technically just come out, as of today, come out of a lockdown since the beginning of January. You know, which was meant to be, you're not allowed outside your house apart from essential travel, but you know, you know, there's only so long that you can lock everyone into their houses until they start to go, no, I'm probably not going to do that. So yeah, jiu-jitsu has been absolutely battered in the UK. You know, it really is horrible. And even though if there's a few people training in bubbles or stuff, or training behind closed doors in the UK, we've had no seminars, we've had no competitions, anything close to competitions to speak of. And, you know, we still won't be for the short future ahead of us, the next couple of months. So yeah, it's been pretty devastating for the sport. You know, I'm sure a lot of gyms have really struggled. Some gyms have closed down. I'm sure some gyms will continue, you know, will continue the struggle and close down in the near future. But there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. We've got that date in June. Fingers crossed. Everyone's just hoping that we're able to continue and restart on that June date. But yeah, pretty brutal. I think the UK has had maybe the strictest and longest lockdowns in the entire world.
Have you been able to travel at all, go to other places, any other countries in Europe or anything like that to train?
Yeah, so that's not something that I've done. Yeah, it's just not something that I've done. There have been some people who have done that. A few people I know were going out to Brazil because Brazil was so lax. And you know, whether that's working for them or not, I'm not exactly sure, but it's kind of crazy what's going on over there. I saw one, you know, maybe beginning of the year, some guy messaged me like, man, you need to come out to Brazil. Showed me a picture after training, and he's just on the streets of like having like a carnival party, you know. It's kind of crazy, but I know a lot of people went over there. Then they brought in basically they brought down quarantine hotels, or they brought in a rule where anyone traveling from abroad would have to quarantine in a hotel at their own expense, which was like would be like $2,500 would have cost you for the 10 days that you were there. So everyone kind of, either you'd have to come home or you'd have to stay away until that went away. So I don't think many people have been traveling the train, but I do know that some people have, either to other places in Europe or off to Brazil.
Yeah, it's you know, here in the US, it's kind of state by state. You know,
Yes.
Some are essentially wide open and you can do whatever you want. Some are much more closed down. And I'm lucky, and you know, in May we opened up, but you had to train with just one buddy in a square. Essentially, it was just the two of you, and then since then we've opened it up a lot more. But yeah, I know for some guys it's definitely been hard not being able to train, or only train with like one buddy in the garage or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's really obviously this whole situation's crazy, but yeah, America's super crazy because you have places that, I know Florida kind of just opened up completely a while ago. I know that Texas it's coming in the next couple of days. I think they're opening everything up. And then you have other states. I know California's pretty strict, but all the Californians are really moaning about how strict it is. And then you see pictures of them like going out to eat a dinner, and they're moaning that they have to, you know, like sit apart from each other in dinner. I'm like, we haven't been to a restaurant in 4 months. You know, it's way like that.
Yeah, it's somewhat all about perspective, right? Like it's always
yeah, could be. So if you're in California and you think you got it bad, it could be worse, because I guarantee you that we don't have California weather either.
That's true. I didn't think about that, but
The
yeah,
weather
even
sucks here, man. It sucks.
yeah, especially because it's the winter time. So even if you go
Yeah,
out in your backyard to get some fresh air, you're probably getting some rain or some snow, depending on where you're
yeah,
at.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
All right. So, I've talked about a bit of your past and right. And you've competed at Polaris. I know you've done some ADCC stuff, some Eddie Bravo stuff. When you're training at, or, when you're competing at some of those high levels, what is it that drives you to say, yes, I want to be, compete with the very best in the world?
Yeah, that's something that I've wanted to do ever since I started training. Even though I do love coaching, I love teaching. I still consider myself a competitor first and foremost. And yeah, I have been lucky to compete on some really great shows. And one of the reasons I stopped teaching I stopped teaching at Mill Hill. I was teaching there for 12 years, and I stopped teaching at the end of in September 2019. And the plan was to kind of put teaching on the back burner in order to focus on myself to compete and train and travel to compete and kind of really have a good run at some of the big spots in the sport, wanting to get to ADCC and try and, medal at ADCC and stuff like that. And then I went away, I did some traveling, I did some training, and then this whole thing happened. So it was kind of inconvenient, obviously inconvenient to everyone, but the timing for me really couldn't have been any worse in terms of what I wanted to do, because I went from quitting my job to compete to not competing at all for a couple of years. So I'm really, really looking forward to moving forward once this is done and focusing on competition again. I do want to try and, the super fights, for me, there's kind of almost two categories. You got you're fighting for prestige, and you're fighting for notoriety, and in your IBJJF tournaments and in your ADCC and stuff like that. And then you have the super fights, which is you're fighting for a challenge, you're fighting for fun, you're fighting to entertain the crowd, you're fighting to do what you love on the bigger stage. And that's what stuff like Quintet was and Polaris was. It really is all about having some fun matchups and being able to compete against people that I wouldn't, be able to compete against in other situations.
So let's talk about, training back in the day when you were able to train and get ready for competitions, right? How often were you rolling to get ready for, let's say, Polaris?
Yeah, so it changed over time. One thing, and one of the reasons why I kind of lent so strongly into the strength and conditioning stuff is I injured my back way back now, maybe 9 years ago now. It was a really bad back injury, and it kind of sidelined me for a little while. But what it really caused me to do is I couldn't roll as much as I wanted to. So most professional jiu-jitsu athletes are going to be rolling twice a day. I could not roll twice a day. My back would just not have it. I was lucky if I could roll, once a day. So basically what I did was I started to, because I couldn't outwork my competitors on the jiu-jitsu mats, I would try and equal out that advantage that I was maybe losing by outworking them in the weight room and stuff that I could control and wouldn't injure my back. So that's how I really, really got into the strength and conditioning stuff, was kind of through necessity almost. In terms of how I was training for individual fights, I was, teaching full time for the past, 4 or 5 years before I stopped teaching in the end of 2019. So a lot of my training would be done with my students, basically. I try and get some training outside and just with the higher level guys, but a lot of my training would be done with my students. Not everyone has the, and I kind of spoke about this when I competed against Jake Shields, which was, he was at Danaher Death Squad training with all of the best guys in the world. And, he was training with Gordon Ryan and Nicky Ryan and Gary Tonnen and Eddie Cummins and Craig Jones. And I was in Mill Hill training with Dave and Tom, who's like a part-time. But I think if you're smart with your jiu-jitsu and you train hard and you know what you're doing, you can still rise to a high level, maybe not to become ADCC champion by training with only amateurs, but I think you can raise a lot higher. I think a lot of people diminish their own ability to rise in the sport because they believe that they're sort of fenced in by their own circumstance. So some people training in a small gym will believe that they're only able to achieve small things. I kind of wanted to show some of these people that you could train at a small gym with, you know, not black belts even. Obviously I did have some black belts to train with, but you could train with guys who weren't professional athletes and still be able to compete against people who were training with other professional athletes. You know, I still wouldn't recommend it as the best way to win ADCC, but it was the way that I was having to do it at some point. So that's kind of why in the end, you know, although I believe that you could get to a higher level than what a lot of people thought training that way, it is important to also, I think, go and train with professional guys and be around full-time jiu-jitsu guys and train with that as well, which was my plan for last year and obviously just didn't happen.
Sure. So, you know, you talked about training and your back injury and that sort of stuff. What do you do as far as recovery and then rest?
Yeah, so for me, I think, and something that I've really been able to get a lot better at over the, you know, one of the advantages, one of the very few advantages of the lockdown was being able to focus on sleep and being able to get, basically it sounds a bit weird, but to get good at sleeping, which I've been able to do more of in the last year because I haven't, you know, when I used to teach, I used to finish teaching at about, you know, sometimes 10 o'clock at night. You get home, you wind down, you eat some food, you go into bed at like 1, 2 in the morning if you're lucky. Without having to do that, I was being able to eat much earlier, to wind down much earlier, go to bed much earlier, and kind of get my body into a much more natural rhythm. And I definitely feel, and I also started tracking my sleep. So I got an Aura ring, which is like a fitness tracking ring. I don't use it for the fitness tracking, but I use it for the sleep tracking and able to see how high the quality of my recovery is. And the difference between a bad night's sleep and a good night's sleep to how you feel the next day is just unbelievable. So I think the sleep is the most important thing. Diet is very important as well. Another thing that I was able to work on more over the last year. I used to travel quite a lot. I was teaching seminars and traveling to teach and compete quite often over the, you know, before the pandemic. So it's, you know, I'm still trying to eat clean, but sometimes it can be very difficult and you just end up grabbing something that's not ideal. Whereas now, locked at home for the last year, you're just going to be eating exactly what you want to be eating. So I was able to sort my food out, feel like my recovery is pretty good. Between those two things, I definitely think those two things are the most important two things. And then just making sure that all of your training is pretty smart.
Yeah, sleep is a major factor. I've noticed it for myself, and also I interviewed a doctor a couple of months ago, and he worked with college football, like American football players, and he basically, through his study, found that 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep is the optimal range.
Yeah.
And basically what he said was, you know, one day isn't going to kill you, but 2, 3, 4 days, he could see dramatic differences in their performance, in the likelihood that they would get injured, that sort of thing. So if you get shitty sleep night after night after night, you're definitely going to struggle and you're setting yourself up.
Yeah, 100%.
So when you, let's say, you know, training just kind of a normal week versus training for a competition that's coming up, do you vary what you're doing at all, or is it kind of the same?
Yeah, so if I'm the main difference is it's not massively different, but the main difference is my sparring sessions may be slightly longer, they may be slightly harder, they might be more intense, more specific in what I'm looking to try and do. I may throw in some extra rolling sessions if I feel like I need it, and then I also start to pull back slightly as I move towards competition day. I'll start doing less very, very heavy, or at least lowering the intensity of my very heavy lifting stuff. On the one occasion that I really took my foot off of the heavy lifting stuff, you know, a lot of people, because I've been doing it for so long, I was all, you know, some people advise me to do that and say, you know, you shouldn't be lifting so much. It's not necessary for you to lift so much so close to a competition. And I kind of thought, well, you know, it makes sense. I'll give it a go. And I did that for my fight against Jake Shields at Polaris. And I really focused on just doing conditioning work, no heavy strength work. And it was the worst that I've ever felt, really, going into a competition. You know, I felt weak. And even though I probably wasn't super weak, maybe even just the psychological side of not throwing around heavy weights, you know, for months was affecting me. But I made sure that I didn't do that again. I don't basically, I don't do anything stupid close to competition, but I still like to lift heavy, even up to about a week out.
Yeah, and that sometimes is the hard part when you started trying to figure out like what's the right training program for me, right? How much strength conditioning, what kind of honestly, it varies person by person. Will you get benefits from doing this type of program? Yes. Will you get good benefits from a different program? Yes. But it's also just how the hell do you feel? And then, I'm with you. I've tested like, all right, I'm going to slow down a little bit, not work as hard going in. I think it's probably 100% mental.
Yeah.
Like if you tested my numbers, I'm sure it would be the exact same, but it's all in my head that like, all right, maybe I didn't work as hard. So maybe I'm not as prepared going into it.
Yeah, definitely.
So we need to, kind of wrap it up, even though I would love to talk to you all day. As you think about, the future and, where you're headed, what are some of the future plans for you or goals?
Yeah. So, that's the thing at the moment. It's been so hard. I think maybe the last year has stopped people from thinking about the future in a way that they maybe never ever have had to face before. It's very difficult because we've never been unable to do something, really unable. Like we cannot leave the country right now. It is impossible for us to leave the country unless you have business there. This is not something, or it's impossible for me to compete in jiu-jitsu in this country right now because there are no tournaments going on. So it's so hard, and it has been so hard for the past year to think about the future because there's so much uncertainty there. With things looking a little bit better, feeling optimistic about the rest of the year. I do feel like once we get past this summer, I can start getting into competition. And really that is the goal for me, is to really get onto the competition mats, put all of the training into practice, start getting used to competition again. And then, really the main goal has been what it's been for years, which is to qualify for ADCC and then, go and do as best as I can at the ADCC.
Nice. So when you were thinking ahead, right, as you're planning to get ready for ADCC, you're going to go down to Puerto Rico or are you going to stay in Europe? What's the plan?
My initial goal was to go to San Diego, probably, to train
with the Atos guys.
Yeah, probably. But I'd also like to get out to Marcelo's as well. Marcelo has kind of always been my jiu-jitsu hero, so I might get out to New York. But I have to see how the world is looking when I do so. But yeah, my goal is to travel around, without having to worry about owning a gym at the moment. Something for the future, but at the moment when I don't have that, I'm going to look to travel around to get the training that I need to compete at the highest level.
Nice. So if people want to follow you, see you tearing cards in half with an axe that's bigger than your whole body, swinging it around, that sort of thing, where should they check you out?
Okay, so you can find me at my Instagram, which is raspberry_ape. You can also find me on YouTube, which is, I have some stuff on there. I have a podcast myself, but I just haven't been able to record because I only record in person. I haven't been able to record over the last year. But I've got quite a few bits of things on there, which is youtube.com/raspberryape. And then my website is raspberryape.com. And, you can find a few things on there, some merch and my grip instructional as well.
Yeah. And if you want to look really sexy in a singlet, he has one of those for you too.
I do.
So, yeah,
I do.
Make sure you check it out. So Dan, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, brother. My absolute pleasure chatting to you.
All right.